There are moments whispered in the shadowed corners of the Imperium, where even the most loyal dare not let their thoughts linger too long. Among those forbidden imaginings lies the most dreadful question of all. What would become of mankind if the Golden Throne, that sacred ancient device binding the Emperor's broken form, were to fail? The throne is not merely a relic of technology lost to time. It is the beating heart of humanity's survival, the beacon that pierces the endless void, the fragile light holding back the endless hunger of the galaxy. Should it falter, the Astronomican would gutter and fade, the Imperium would fall into silence and blindness, and the gates of the Imperium would howl wide over Terra itself. This is not merely speculation. This is a thought that rattles like a death knell, lurking in the minds of those who know the truth of mankind's precarious survival. To imagine its failure is to walk willingly into a nightmare from which there is no awakening. Before we descend further into this vision of dread, I ask you to stand vigil with me. Join this channel, lend your voice and your presence, and let us explore the fate of humanity together. Like, share, and subscribe, not as empty ritual but as oath-bound companions on this dark road through the lore of Warhammer 40,000. Deep within the heart of the Imperial Palace, past the kilometers of walls fortified by millennia of siegecraft, beyond chambers where incense hangs thick as fog, and the shadows of statues stretch like penitents, lies a sanctum no mortal dares approach unbidden. Here, beneath vaulted ceilings carved with forgotten victories and veiled in the smoke of endless offerings, rests the Golden Throne. It is not golden in any way that conveys majesty to the eye. To gaze upon it is to see both machine and monument, rusted plates and sacred wards, cables like the veins of a god stretching in every direction. It is the altar upon which the survival of mankind is bound, yet it is also a tomb, an ossuary of flesh and steel. The air is heavy with the drone of machinery that should never sleep, and with each beat it thrums like the slowing pulse of a failing heart. The throne was not crafted as a seat for a monarch. It was born of an age lost to memory, when the Emperor walked among his legions not as a corpse but as conqueror, and when the secret sciences of mankind still burned brightly. Those sciences have long since guttered out. What remains is a half-remembered relic, maintained by tech priests who mutter Benharic prayers as much to themselves as to their machines, who patch metal with faith and feed its systems with endless blood tithe. There is not a single soul alive who fully understands its design. The Adeptus Mechanicus record each failing system with dread, knowing that one day their rituals will not be enough. That day, they whisper, is not impossibility, it is inevitability. To stand before the throne is to confront the paradox of divinity and decay. The Emperor's form, shattered beyond mortal comprehension, remains enthroned at its core. He is neither living nor dead, neither man nor god, but something between states, a stasis of agony and eternal burden. His body is withered to husk, his eyes blind yet blazing with unseen fire, his voice absent yet echoing in the minds of psychers across the galaxy. Thousands of souls are fed to the machine daily, sacrifices without count, their lives drained in fire and terror so that his light might burn another day. The scent of burning flesh lingers beneath the incense, carried on recycled air that never dissipates. It is the hidden truth beneath all ceremony. The Golden Throne is a machine powered by death. Custodian guards stand eternal vigil at the chamber's perimeter, their armor polished as if to blind the thought of failure itself. They do not speak of their doubts, but doubt gnaws all the same. They alone see the endless procession of condemned psychers who are marched before the throne, bound and screaming, their voices rising in terror until they are consumed by fire and silence. They alone hear the subtle changes in the machinery's tone, the irregular grind of gears, the shifting pitch in its song that suggest pieces of this device are faltering, fracturing, decaying beyond repair. Their oaths demand loyalty without question, yet in the darkest silence of their watch, even they cannot escape the question, how long can this last? The tech priests of the Mechanicus are equally burdened, though their voices are drowned beneath liturgy and rite. They anoint the throne with sacred oils, trace sigils of the Omnissiah across its panels, and whisper prayers in binary static as they twist rusted valves. Yet their devotion cannot mask their terror. To admit the throne is failing is heresy, for to doubt it is to doubt the God Emperor himself. And so they couch their fears in ritual, marking anomalies as portents, breakdowns as omen. The Mechanicus cannot restore the throne. They can only delay its collapse, prolong its half-life, and beg the Omnissiah for deliverance that will never come. Around this machine, all of Terra breathes in unknowing reverence. Pilgrims cross oceans of ash to kneel upon the rockcrete of the Imperial Palace's outer gates, believing their prayers rise to the Emperor's ears. They do not see the rust, nor hear the coughing gears, nor smell the burnt remains of psychers in the chamber beyond. To them, the throne is perfect, eternal, incorruptible. Their faith shields them from the truth. Yet faith, however bright, does not mend machinery. Faith cannot replace ancient components. Faith cannot stop entropy. And so the question lingers like a shadow across the throne's chamber, unspoken but ever present: what happens when it fails? The priests know the circuits will not last forever. The custodians hear the faltering rhythms in its pulse. Even the silent body upon its seat, perhaps, knows this truth. The golden throne is not a monument of eternity. It is a machine, and all machines in time. The sound in the chamber shifts, a groan deep within its frame, and a custodian's gauntlet tightens around the haft of his guardian's spear. The machine should never rest, but it is weary beyond endurance, and in its weariness, mankind's fate hangs by a thread. The corridors leading to the throne stretch like arteries, feeding its hunger with the lifeblood of the Imperium. Each day, endless processions move through them, priests draped in incense-sodden robes, their chants echoing against the gilded stone, condemned psychers shackled and stumbling, their eyes wide with terror as they realize at last the truth of their fate, and silent ranks of servitors, their flesh long stripped of purpose, bearing vessels of fuel and relic oils to be poured into the ancient heart of the machine. These halls reverberate with the thunder of ritual, yet underneath that thunder is the steady march of death. For the psychers, there is no redemption. They are told their sacrifice is noble, that their life will sustain the God Emperor's eternal light, and some cling to this delusion in their final steps. Others wail, begging for mercy, clawing at chains that will not yield. None escape. They are led to the throne, placed upon altars that gleam with old blood, and burned alive by a force they cannot comprehend. Their agony is fuel, their souls flung screaming into the Emperor's psychic furnace. 1,000 each day, drawn from across the Imperium, their lives extinguished to keep one corpse alive. Those who serve in this cycle become hollow. Tech priests whisper binary prayers as they record the deaths, cataloging the moment each soul vanishes into fire. Custodians remain silent, their faces unreadable, yet the light in their eyes darkens with every procession. Even the lesser attendants, the scribes who tally the endless lists, grow numb to the slaughter. But numbness is not immunity. In the quiet, when chants fade and corridors empty, some hear the echo of screams in their dreams. Some wake with blood upon their lips, convinced they too have been sacrificed. Madness spreads in whispers, but no one dares to name it. Beyond the chamber walls, terror itself depends upon this unseen carnage. Hive cities belch smoke into the sky, their manufactorums grinding endlessly, and all of it is for the upkeep of a machine most citizens will never glimpse. They see only the banners of the Aquila, the statues of the Emperor triumphant, the propaganda that paints him not as a corpse sustained by blood, but as a living, breathing deity watching over his people. It is easier this way. A lie, yes, but a necessary one. Were the truth known, that the throne is decaying, that his body is little more than a husk, that humanity's survival rests on slaughter without end, faith itself would collapse and with it the Imperium. Yet even faith cannot forever drown the evidence. The throne trembles more now than it once did. Its systems falter with greater frequency. Cables snap and are reforged with half-understood rites. Machine spirits howl their defiance, and fractures spiderweb across ancient panels. There are records of earthquakes rumbling beneath the palace as though terror itself shudders with the strain of bearing this weight. And still the sacrifices increase, as if blood alone can patch a dying machine. How many more must be given? How many psychers remain to be bled dry before the vaults of the galaxy run empty? None dare speak these questions aloud, but they hang in the incense-choked air like smoke refusing to clear. The Emperor's body remains still upon his throne, his presence both eternal and absent. To some, he radiates a light that pierces their souls, a psychic flare that burns too bright to look upon. To others, he is nothing but a corpse held upright by machinery, a skeleton enshrined in false gold. Both perceptions may be true, neither matters. What matters is that he endures, and with him, mankind. But for how long? There are whispers in the Mechanicus, denied yet never silenced, that fragments of ancient data slate archives speak of the throne not as salvation, but as prison. That the Emperor's form is not merely sustained by it, but bound within it, shackled to a half-life that denies both death and rebirth. If such words are heresy, they are heresies birthed by fear. For those who tend the throne each day, who see its systems grind and stutter, the thought that it is not eternal becomes impossible to banish. Faith demands certainty, the throne offers only uncertainty. And so, the Imperium lives upon a contradiction, a god who cannot move, a machine that should never rest, a galaxy tethered by blood and silence. The custodians who guard him stand as statues of gold, but even statues crack. The tech priests maintain their rites, but even rituals fray. The people worship a lie, but even lies cannot endure forever. The throne is weary, and its weariness spreads like a plague through all who serve it. In the heart of the palace, beneath stone older than empires, the machine groans again, louder this time. Servitors halt mid-step, binary prayers falter, and for a moment, silence reigns. Then the machine shudders back to life, its noise filling the void, and all breathe again. But beneath that relief lies terror, for each stutter of the throne, each hesitation in its endless cycle, is a reminder that the end is not far away. And when the throne stops, when silence falls and does not lift, what then? There are nights on Terra when the sky itself seems to sag beneath the weight of smog and ash, when even the stars are choked from sight by the endless burning of manufactorums. Yet in the palace, beneath the marble and ceramite, the darkness is deeper still. Few living souls are permitted within the throne's sanctum, yet those who are know this truth. The Emperor's presence is both unbearable and indispensable. To walk in his shadow is to feel the crushing pressure of his psychic radiance pressing upon your soul, as though your thoughts themselves are laid bare. Yet even this presence has grown erratic. Some claim they feel it dim, flickering like a candle in a storm, while others insist it burns with a feverish intensity, scalding them more violently than in centuries past. Whichever is true, both signs speak of instability. The custodian guard are not blind to this. They are the Emperor's companions, his personal defenders, each chosen not merely for martial skill but for loyalty beyond question. For 10,000 years they have stood immovable, watching as psychers burn, as priests chant, as tech priests scramble with prayers to failing systems. They do not speak, yet silence itself grows heavy. They notice the changes, the odd rhythm of machinery, the sudden fluctuations in light, the subtle tremors running through the structure. Their oaths forbid fear, yet they know the truth better than any soul alive. If the throne fails, no spear, no shield, no fortress wall will hold back what comes. The Adeptus Custodes are warriors without equal, yet even they are powerless against inevitability. Among the tech priests who maintain the throne, fear takes another form. To them, the machine is sacred text, each valve and circuit an illuminated scripture of the Omnissiah. Their prayers are as mechanical as their chants, recited in binharic bursts, as hands of metal twist rusted panels and weld cracked conduits. They see the fractures widening. They hear the failing tones of machine spirits straining against the burden of millennia. They do not say it is breaking. Instead, they phrase it as liturgy. The Omnissiah tests us, or the Emperor requires deeper faith. But in their hearts, buried under augmetic flesh and coded catechisms, they know, even the greatest machine cannot last forever. The most haunting testimonies come from the silent sisters who sometimes pass through these chambers. The sisters of silence, sworn never to speak, sense the psychic storm around the throne with clarity unmatched. Their null auras strip away the comforting illusions of faith and reveal the raw wound beneath. Though they utter no words, Their faces, cold and unreadable, betray flickers of unease. They know that the Emperor's psychic light, projected through the Astronomican, is what binds the Imperium together. They feel the strain in that projection, as if the beacon itself cries out in exhaustion. If these women who have spent lifetimes suppressing and enduring psychic tides begin to falter in their composure, then the truth must be dire indeed. Yet outside these sacred walls, the Imperium chants its endless litanies of certainty. To the billions across Terra, the Emperor is invincible, eternal, ever vigilant. His throne is not a machine to them, but a symbol of divinity. To suggest otherwise is heresy punishable by death, and so the lie becomes the mortar of an empire. But the closer one stands to the throne, the more fragile that lie becomes. Even the custodians, who would slay their own brothers before admitting weakness, cannot wholly deny the creeping shadow of dread. The sacrifices continue unabated. Each day, 1,000 psychers are led screaming into the fire. Each day, the throne consumes them, their essence pouring into the Emperor's withered form. This endless tide of death has become routine, an unbroken rhythm of horror. Yet what is routine can become fragile if interrupted. The day the sacrifices cease, or the day the throne cannot receive them, is the day the galaxy itself begins to die, and all within these halls know that such a day will come. There are those among the Mechanicus who whisper in forbidden secrecy that the throne should be abandoned altogether, that the Emperor should be allowed to pass beyond, to die so that perhaps his spirit might return in a form unshackled by rust and rot. But such thoughts are crushed with merciless swiftness. To abandon the throne is to abandon humanity. To let him die is to betray every world still clinging to survival in his name. And yet, deep down they know the question cannot be banished forever. What if his death is not the end? What if it is the only path to renewal? These are questions asked only in silence, questions that earn death if spoken aloud. The chamber groans again, a tremor shaking the metal underfoot. A low hum builds into a shriek, then fades. Sparks shower from a conduit overhead, and tech priests rush forward, chanting frantically, sealing the breach with sparks and ritual oil. The custodians watch, unmoving, but their hands are tight on their spears. The machine labors on, weary, staggering, but still alive. For now, no one dares speak of the day it stops. But all who serve here, from the highest custodian to the lowest scribe, feel it drawing closer. The throne should never rest. Yet one day, it will. And when that day comes, the walls of the palace will not be strong enough to hold back the tide. The throne's chamber is never silent. Even in the stillest hours of Terra's night, when the hives beyond the palace murmur in subdued exhaustion, the throne speaks. It speaks in the grinding of gears older than empires, in the static crackle of cables drawing life from 1,000 hidden reactors, in the faint groans of its golden frame straining against eternity. It is the sound of survival balanced upon the edge of collapse. Those who serve here come to know its voice as intimately as they know their own. They can tell when the hum is steady, when the tone falters, when the rhythm stutters as though the machine itself gasps for breath. Some of them fear silence more than death, for they know what silence would mean. The Emperor's presence is woven into that noise, felt not in words or gestures but in the raw psychic weight that presses upon every soul. For 10,000 years he has remained enthroned, his body withered beyond recognition, yet his will radiating outward through the Astronomican like a beacon of divine fire. But even this light feels different now. To some it seems sharper, almost desperate, flaring like a fire starved of oxygen. To others it seems to wane, flickering as if it can no longer hold its shape against the storm. No one can say which is true, only that change is upon them. And in the Imperium, change is often the herald of ruin. The sacrifices do not slow. Day after day, psychers are dragged before the throne, their lives extinguished in fire to keep the Emperor's radiance burning. The screams echo off marble and steel, muffled by chanting priests, yet never fully drowned. The custodians hear them, the tech priests record them. The chamber walls themselves seem to carry the echo, as if the palace remembers each soul consumed. 1,000 deaths each day, 10,000 every 10, millions upon millions across centuries. an empire of bones to feed a single husk. And still the machine falters, still it groans. There are rumors among the lower attendants that the Emperor's body moves sometimes, not in majesty but in spasm, as though straining against chains unseen. A twitch of a withered hand, a shudder through skeletal limbs, a flicker in empty sockets where once his eyes blazed. Some call these signs of awakening, a herald that he will rise once more to lead humanity. Others call them death throes, the final spasms of a body stretched too long across the span of centuries. No one knows. No one can know, but the uncertainty feeds the dread that coils through the palace like smoke. In the archives of the Mechanicus, sealed behind vaults and sealed again by oaths of silence, there exist records too dangerous to share. Fragments of ancient data recovered from ruins and corrupted cogitators speak of the Golden Throne not as salvation, but as prison, that it was designed not to sustain the Emperor but to hold him, to bind his psychic essence within a frame of iron and gold. Whether these records are true or blasphemy cannot be proven, yet their existence gnaws at the tech priests, who must confront the daily reality of a machine they cannot master. If the throne is indeed a prison, then to maintain it is both salvation and betrayal. If it is not, then all these doubts are heresy without purpose. In either case the result is the same: they cannot stop its decline. The Adeptus Custodes, unflinching as statues, are no less haunted. They see the Shiching falter, they hear the tremors in its song. They know their spears and armor mean nothing when the throne fails. They have sworn to defend the Emperor with their lives, but how does one defend a god from death itself? What enemy do they strike when the foe is entropy? When the opponent is time, they stand immovable because they must, because the Imperium needs their certainty. Yet within their silence lies the weight of futility. Beyond the chamber, the galaxy spins, ignorant of how near the abyss yawns. Whole worlds live and die believing the Emperor's will is eternal, his throne inviolate, his light unending. Pilgrims cross oceans of void to kneel upon Terra's surface, believing their whispered prayers reach his ear. They do not know their God is sustained by blood and machinery, that his beacon flickers, that their faith shields them from truths too dreadful to speak. If they knew, the Imperium would fracture overnight, undone not by alien claws or demonic fire, but by despair. And so the truth remains locked within the palace, guarded as fiercely as the Emperor himself. Yet truth has a way of bleeding through. The throne stutters again, a deep grinding, followed by a flare of light that casts shadows sharp as blades across the chamber walls. For a breath, all within holds still. Tech priests freeze in mid-ritual, custodians grip their weapons. The sacrificial pyres burn more fiercely as though consuming psychers too quickly. Then, with a groan, the machine steadies, resuming its endless dirge. Life continues. But every stutter is a reminder. Every tremor is a prophecy. The day will come when the machine does not recover, and when that day arrives, there will be no warning, no preparation, no reprieve, only silence. The throne is a machine that should never rest. Yet nothing in the galaxy is eternal, not stars, not worlds, not gods, even machines die. And when this one dies, it will not be the loss of a single device. It will be the unraveling of all that mankind has built, the extinguishing of the light that keeps the void at bay. The chapter closes as the throne groans once more, and in its weary song echoes the sound of inevitability. The machine labors on, still alive, still burning with stolen lives. But all who hear it know the truth. Each breath may be its last. The Astronomican is not a flame in any mortal sense, yet it burns brighter than any star. To those born upon the soil of hive worlds, or the dust of frontier colonies, it is unseen, unfelt, unknown. But to those who ride the void, who sail upon oceans of madness where the warp crashes and churns, the Astronomican is life itself. It is the guiding light, the fixed point in a sea without horizon. Without it, mankind would scatter like ash upon a storm, lost in currents that devour both flesh and soul. The Emperor's spirit, bound upon the golden throne, projects this beacon into the immaterium. It is no simple radiance, but a psychic roar, a blinding flare that sears across the warp, cutting through demonic storms and howling entities. To a navigator opening the warp eye within their skull, it is a blazing star upon which to lock their course. Without it, there would be no navigation, no passage between worlds, no trade or war or empire. The Imperium, stretched across 1,000,000 worlds, depends entirely upon a light conjured by a corpse on Terra. It is not hyperbole to say humanity lives upon borrowed time. It is those who bear the mark of navigator houses know this truth intimately. Within the chambers of their void ships, cloaked in shadows and veils, they unfurl the third eye and stare into madness. To them, the Astronomican is more than light. It is a command, a pulse of authority that cuts through the chorus of the Imperium, yet even navigators whisper that the beacon wavers. Some claim its edges fray, its once perfect brilliance now flickering like a sun clouded by smoke. They do not speak these fears aloud, for they are bound by oath to the Imperium, but the doubts linger. To doubt the beacon is to doubt survival itself. Across the void, astropaths receive his call in ways stranger still. Bound together in choirs, their minds flayed and remade by the Emperor's hand, they sense his presence not as a star but as a voice. It is a voice without words, yet heavy with meaning, a command that sustains their sanity and their service. They channel this light into transmissions, their thoughts hurled across the void, allowing the Imperium to cling to the illusion of unity. But when the beacon stutters, their voices falter, messages warp, fragment or vanish into silence. Entire campaigns have been lost because a fleet sailed blind into storms when the Astronomican dimmed. To the astropaths, each fluctuation is terror made real, for if the voice ever ceases, their own minds will be left adrift in the warp, prey to hungers that never sleep. Even ordinary citizens, though they never glimpse the Astronomican, feel its influence in subtle ways. A shipment of grain arrives on time, and a hive city eats for another week. A regiment of Astra Militarum appears where it is needed, and a frontier world survives an orc incursion. These are not miracles of chance, they are the result of a beacon allowing ships to cross the void. When that beacon falters, shipments fail, regiments vanish, and worlds starve or burn. The Astronomican is the unacknowledged rhythm of life, the hidden breath of empire. It is so constant that most never think upon it. But constancy is fragile. There have been times in history when the light dimmed, when warp storms raged so fiercely that even the Astronomican could not pierce them. Whole sectors of space went silent, cut off from Terra, left to fend for themselves. In some, faith endured, in others, rebellion blossomed, on many, silence meant death. These are previews of what would come should the light die entirely, not temporary shadows but eternal night. And even these lesser shadows are enough to remind Imperial commanders how thin the veil of survival truly is. On Terra, the priests chant that the Emperor's light is eternal. In the void, navigators and astropaths know otherwise. They know that eternity is an illusion, and that each flicker of the beacon is another heartbeat closer to the end. They cling to his radiance because they must, because there is nothing else to hold. But in the quiet of their thoughts, they ask the forbidden. What happens if the Astronomican fades forever? What happens when the last light of mankind gutters out in the storm? The warp does not wait for answers. It circles, patient, ravenous. Without the beacon, the predators will feast. Imagine a fleet at the edge of the galaxy, its holds packed with regiments of Astra Militarum, bound for some nameless war. The ships ride the Imperium as sailors once rode storm-tossed seas, their hulls groaning with every surge of unreality. In the navigator's sanctum, a pale figure kneels with the third eye open, staring into the maelstrom of the warp. Without the Astronomican, the fleet would have no course, no hope. With it, they sail as if along a taut thread drawn through the madness, a fragile line leading them toward their destination. But even now the line quivers, sometimes it fades, blurred by storms, and the navigator trembles. The ships shudder with uncertainty, and in those moments, every soldier feels the breath of doom brush against them. One misstep, one loss of the light, and the fleet would scatter like prey before wolves. No one aboard would ever find their way home again. The Imperium calls itself eternal, but it is only as eternal as the Astronomican's reach. Each planet is a bead upon a string, and that string is the Emperor's psychic flame. When the flame flickers, beads fall loose. When it dies, the string unravels. Across a million worlds, people labor and pray, and die believing they are part of something vast and unbreakable, yet their connection is thinner than the breath of a candle flame. The truth is not strength, but fragility disguised as faith. Astropaths know this better than most. When they reach across the void with their minds, it is his light that steadies them, his voice that guides them through madness. Without it, their messages warp into nonsense, words twisted into demonic laughter or consumed by silence. Entire wars have been lost because orders never arrived. An imperial governor may believe reinforcements are weeks away, yet the fleet never comes. A hive world may wait for promised food shipments, but the grain lies rotting in cargo holds adrift in the warp, lost to the dark. Each failure is not mere inconvenience, it is starvation, rebellion, extinction, and all of it stems from the faint tremors in a single light projected from Terra. Even now, there are systems cut off from that flame. Regions like the Halo stars or the Ghoul stars exist on the fringes, where the Astronomican's light is faint, distorted by distance. To live there is to feel always at the edge of night, always uncertain whether the next shipment will arrive, whether the next astropathic choir will reach its destination. Many of these worlds become little empires of their own, drifting away from Terra's grasp, clinging to the Emperor in name but ruled in practice by governors and warlords. Some fall into superstition, worshipping distorted versions of the imperial creed. Others vanish entirely, consumed by Xenos or swallowed by the warp. To live far from the Astronomican's light is to live as a flickering ember, knowing at any moment the wind might extinguish you. The void is patient. Orcs do not wait for the beacon to falter, they crash upon worlds regardless, drawn by blood and battle. Necrons wake from their tombs, indifferent to human lights. Tyranids swarm, guided not by beacons but by hunger. Yet chaos waits most eagerly. For every moment the Astronomican falters, daemons grow stronger. The warp is a tide, and the Emperor's beacon holds it back like a dam of light. Should the light weaken, cracks form. Daemonic incursions multiply. Warp storms expand. The predators of the Imperium hunger endlessly for the day, when the dam bursts and the flood consumes all. Still, the Imperium endures through ritual. Priests preach the constancy of the Emperor's light, teaching that the Astronomican burns forever. Captains of void ships insist their voyages will be safe, for his flame guides them. Astropaths recite hymns as they scream into the void, praying their words reach another mind. Faith holds the illusion together, but illusions do not stop entropy. The truth remains hidden but undeniable. The Astronomican is as fragile as the throne that fuels it. When navigators speak in hushed voices, when astropaths falter in their song, when fleets vanish without word, the unspoken dread grows louder. For if the Astronomican ever ceases, it will not be the failure of one machine or one man. It will be the extinguishing of the only flame that keeps humanity from scattering into darkness. And across the galaxy, predators are already circling. There are countless records buried within the administratum, dusty scrolls and cracked data slates that tell of ships lost when the Astronomican flickered. Most are never read, their names forgotten beneath the weight of endless bureaucracy. Yet each one is a story of 1,000 souls cast adrift, swallowed by silence. For the people aboard those vessels, the flicker was not abstract. It was a death sentence drawn out over days, weeks, or centuries. They drifted in the warp without compass, surrounded by storms of screaming madness, their hulls buffeted by tides that obeyed no law of physics. Some ships emerged centuries later, their crews long dead, their hulls clawed by things that never should have touched metal. Others never emerged at all, their names erased except in faint records, their existence reduced to numbers tallied on forgotten lists. On the ground, the failure of the Astronomican is felt no less keenly. A hive world depends on its shipments of food and raw material as surely as lungs depend on air. When ships cannot cross the void, factories grow silent, spires fall into riots, billions starve. On one such world, a single missed convoy sparked chaos. The people cried to the Emperor for sustenance, but none came. Within weeks, the streets of the lower hives ran red as citizens turned on one another. Cults rose in the ashes, promising food in exchange for worship of darker gods. By the time Imperial reinforcements finally pierced the storms and arrived, the world was a charnel pit. The Astronomican had dimmed for only a short while, yet the cost was measured in billions of lives. For soldiers stranded without its light, despair is sharper still. An Astra Militarum regiment dispatched to reinforce a frontier fortress found themselves lost when their guiding flame flickered. They emerged from the warp not at their destination, but in the midst of an unknown system where a tyrannid swarm feasted on the ruins of another human world. With no resupply, no reinforcements, and no chance of retreat, they fought until ammunition ran dry. The last transmissions intercepted by astropathic choirs were not words but screams, their minds devoured as the swarm closed in. Their sacrifice is not listed among great victories. It is not remembered in song. It is another silence, another unmarked grave beneath the void. Astropaths themselves suffer most keenly when the Astronomican wavers. Bound together in choirs, they reach into the warp, their minds lashed to the Emperor's light. When that light flickers, the backlash is agony. Some burn out entirely, their brains collapsing into fire, as daemonic voices shred their sanity. Others vanish mid-transmission, their bodies slumping lifeless as their souls are dragged screaming into the Imperium. Entire choirs have been obliterated, when storms severed the link between Terra and their distant outposts. And yet they continue chanting hymns through bloodied throats, for without them, there would be no communication, no unity. Their suffering is a hidden cost of the beacon's fragility, buried beneath the grand myths of faith. For navigators, the flicker is terror, of a different kind. Their third eye opens to the warp, a vision incomprehensible to ordinary humans. They see the Astronomican as a blazing star in a sea of monsters, the only fixed point that gives meaning to their perception. When it falters, the monsters surge closer. Their forms cannot be described in mortal tongue, masses of shifting flesh, whispers given shape, hungers that stretch beyond infinity, but navigators see them all the same. Some gouge out their own eyes rather than face the sight again. Others cling to their duty and guide ships through storms, their minds breaking piece by piece until their families find only hollow husks where proud scions once stood. Each voyage depends on their courage, and each flicker of the Astronomican gnaws away at that courage until nothing remains. And yet, despite all this suffering, the Imperium does not waver in its creed. To acknowledge fragility is to invite collapse. The priests thunder that the Astronomican is eternal, that his light shines forever. The administratum buries records of lost fleets beneath mountains of parchment. The common citizen does not ask where their food comes from, only that it arrives. The galaxy continues as though nothing falters, but those who know, those who serve in the silence between stars, understand the truth. Humanity does not live beneath eternal light, it lives beneath a failing flame, one sputtering breath from extinction. And when that flame dies, there will be no gentle fading, no slow decline. There will be only sudden night, and the galaxy will be left to predators who have waited too long for their feast. To the Imperium, the Astronomican is spoken of as if it were a natural force, as constant as sunrise, as certain as the spin of planets around their suns. Priests describe it in sermons as the Emperor's eternal flame, proof of his undying vigilance. For countless citizens who will never leave their homeworlds, the Astronomican is not even a concept, it is simply the background of existence, a mystery for the priests and astropaths to worry over, no more relevant to daily life than the orbit of distant moons. Yet this indifference is itself a kind of shield. To know the truth of how fragile the light truly is, how thin the veil between survival and annihilation has become, would drive entire populations into despair. Faith requires ignorance, and the Imperium ensures that ignorance is preserved. But those who travel the stars cannot forget. For voidfarers, the Astronomican is not myth, but compass. They live their lives in metal coffins, hurtling through seas of madness, their trust placed entirely in navigators who can see the Emperor's beacon burning across the Imperium. When the light holds steady, their journeys are perilous, but possible. When it falters, every breath is drawn in fear. A ship caught without the Astronomican is not a ship at all. It is a tomb drifting toward damnation. This knowledge lingers in every crewman's bones, even if never spoken aloud. It hangs like a shadow over the laughter in mess halls and the prayers whispered before launch. Every voyage is a gamble, and the Astronomican is the only stake holding the dice in place. On worlds close to Terra, where the light shines strongest, this truth can be hidden beneath ceremony. But in distant sectors where the beacon flickers faintly like a star blurred by distance, it cannot be ignored. There, governors ration supplies not only for famine and plague, but for the silences that come when trade routes vanish into warp storms. There, soldiers are trained to expect no reinforcements, for orders may take decades to arrive, or never arrive at all. There, whole cultures grow insular, clinging to distorted forms of the imperial creed, convinced their emperor has abandoned them. The Astronomican binds humanity, but it does not bind it equally. Those at the edges of its light live always in the shadow of its fragility. And even upon Terra itself, the whispers grow louder. The Adeptus Mechanicus record every tremor, every fluctuation, every minor faltering of the beacon's rhythm. The Adeptus Custodes remain silent, yet their silence grows heavier with each falter. The Sisters of Silence pass through like shades, their null auras resonating with instability they cannot name. Everyone close to the throne feels it. The light is not as it once was. It strains, it flickers, it labors under a burden too vast for eternity. None dare speak this truth aloud, yet it permeates every prayer, every chant, every ritual. The Astronomican is not eternal. It is maintained, and what is maintained can fail. If it fails, the consequences will not arrive slowly, like the gradual cooling of a sun. They will strike instantly, with violence and finality. Fleets will vanish mid-voyage, their crews lost in howling storms. Astropathic choirs will scream as their minds are torn apart by daemons surging through the gap. Entire sectors will fall silent, governors cut off from Terra's commands, regiments abandoned in hostile territory, colonies starving without shipments from the core. The predators circling at the edges of human space, tyrannid hive fleets, orc empires, Necron dynasties, will descend on isolated worlds like wolves upon lambs. And worst of all, chaos will surge, unbound by the Emperor's light, pouring through cracks in reality, like a flood. It will not be decline. It will be collapse. The Astronomican burns still, and so the Imperium lives, but it burns upon a throne of rust and death, fed by sacrifices that number beyond counting, sustained by a corpse who cannot rise. Each day it shines is another day stolen from inevitability, and as those who know the truth watch its flickering flame, they ask themselves what they dare not speak. What happens when the light finally dies? The answer lies not in the stars, but in the silence that follows, and it is into that silence that we now turn. The first sign is not silence, but confusion. A message delayed, a convoy late, a fleet that should have arrived weeks ago, still absent. On the ground, citizens mutter about administratum inefficiency, the endless red tape of the Imperium, but beneath the surface, governors and generals grow uneasy. They know delays and never just delays. In a galaxy held together by the Astronomican's light, a missed shipment is more than inconvenience, it is the tremor of a coming fracture. On hive worlds, where billions cram into spires that pierce the poisoned skies, life depends on the steady rhythm of supply. Food arrives from agri-worlds, fuel comes from mining colonies, weapons and armor flow from forge worlds. None of these can exist alone, each is a cog in a machine too vast to see. When one cog slips, the machine screams. A single missed freighter can mean famine in a lower hive. A month of silence can spark riots, as starving citizens claw each other apart in the darkness of underhive warrens. Governors may pray for patience, but their prayers are drowned by vox feeds filled with reports of rebellion, cult activity, and spreading panic. The silence becomes heavier with each passing day. For the Astra Militarum, silence is death. A regiment dispatched to a war zone fights with the expectation that reinforcements will come, that orders from high command will arrive, that their sacrifice is not in vain. But when the Astronomican flickers and communication falters, regiments are left stranded. They fight blind, unaware of shifting strategies, unable to call for aid. An enemy may press harder, emboldened by their isolation. Supplies dwindle, ammunition runs low, morale collapses, soldiers whisper in the trenches, "We have been abandoned." Some still fight to the last man, clinging to faith in the Emperor even as their faith in command dissolves. Others break, fleeing into the wastes, or worse, listening to whispers of those who promise salvation in the name of other gods. Silence does not merely kill bodies, it erodes loyalty, rots belief, hollows out the very heart of the Imperium's armies. Even in the void, silence devours. When a system loses its link to Terra, the astropathic choirs fall mute. Governors shout orders that never reach their fleets. Worlds plead for aid, their voices vanishing into storms. For those who listen closely, the absence is deafening. Astropaths describe it as a severed cord. A voice that once sang in chorus now struck dumb. They shiver in their chambers, blind and alone, their only company the whispers of the warp. Some break beneath the strain, tearing their own eyes out, convinced they are already lost. Others fall prey to demonic predators, voices that slip into the silence and disguise themselves as the Emperor's call. The faithful are consumed first, for they are the easiest to deceive. The longer silence lingers, the deeper its teeth sink. On a world cut adrift for months, food riots escalate into full-scale civil war. Manufacturers grind to a halt as raw materials run out, their forges cooling for the first time in centuries. Tech priests wail and perform rites of desperation, but no cogitator or servo arm can conjure resources from nothing. When famine spreads, the ecclesiarchy tightens its grip, declaring hunger a test of faith. Sermons thunder across starving crowds, insisting that endurance is proof of loyalty. Yet in the shadows other voices rise, preachers of chaos, Xenos infiltrators, opportunists who promise bread and freedom. Desperate citizens listen, for hunger is louder than faith. In silence the seeds of heresy sprout quickly. Some worlds endure despite the silence, holding fast to discipline and creed. They ration food with iron fists, execute rioters by the thousands, and double their prayers at the shrines of the Emperor. But endurance comes at a cost. Generations raised in silence forget Terra, forget the Imperium. They know only their governor, their local creed, their immediate survival. The Emperor becomes a distant abstraction, a name invoked but not felt. Over decades, loyalty withers. Entire sectors have drifted this way, becoming empires in all but name, bound more by habit than by faith. When silence reigns long enough, the Imperium's grip fades not with an explosion, but with a whisper. It begins with confusion. It ends with forgetting. And in forgetting lies the slow death of an empire too vast to hear all its children scream. On a frontier agri-world once loyal to Terra, the silence began with the skies. Cargo freighters did not arrive for the harvest, and the grain rotted in storage silos, piled high until insects drowned in seas of spoiled wheat. Farmers prayed to the Emperor, begging him to guide the void ships through, but their prayers went unanswered. Weeks turned into months. The administratum clerks grew desperate, sending transmission after transmission, each one vanishing into the void without reply. Starvation is cruelest when surrounded by abundance. Surplus harvests meant nothing without ships to carry them away, and soon the population began to feed upon itself, riots breaking out over hoarded supplies. Within a year, the governor declared martial law. Within two, chaos cults lit fires in the name of dark gods, promising that their patrons would guide the ships where the Emperor had failed. By the time the beacon flared again and Imperial reinforcements pierced the void, the planet was already lost, its creed twisted, its loyalty gone. Silence had devoured it whole. For soldiers, the pattern is even more ruthless. A crusade fleet sent to cleanse orc infestations across a cluster of worlds suddenly found its astropathic link severed. Their commanders issued orders, but vox relays carried only static. For months regiments fought in isolation, each believing themselves alone, cut off from the wider war. Some succeeded, purging planets with blood and fire, but when reinforcements failed to arrive, they could not hold their victories. Others fell in hopeless last stands, their banners ground beneath orc war machines. Still others broke, their officers slain and their soldiers scattering into the wilderness, reduced to scattered bands of survivors. When silence lifted at last, the crusade was no longer a crusade, but a graveyard, and the orcs ruled more worlds than they had at the beginning. The Astronomican had flickered only for a short span, but in that span an entire war had been lost. Astropaths suffer most intimately from the silence. They are the voices of the Imperium, their minds braided into choirs that span light years. When the Astronomican falters, they are cut adrift in the void, their songs shredded into meaningless static. Some endure, blind and weeping, clutching rosaries as they beg the Emperor to return. Others are not so fortunate. Daemons are drawn to the silence like predators to wounded prey. They whisper in voices that mimic the Emperor, luring astropaths to open themselves wider, promising clarity where there is only deception. Those who succumb are devoured, their bodies collapsing into husks while their souls scream forever in the immaterium. The loss of one astropath is a tragedy, the loss of a choir is disaster. And such losses grow more common whenever the beacon flickers. The most haunting stories come not from soldiers or astropaths, but from civilians caught in the slow spiral of annondament. On a mining world deep within a storm-ridden sector, silence fell for decades. At first the population endured, rationing food, praying at shrines, keeping faith alive with ceremonies repeated in darkness. But as years passed, faith frayed, new generations rose, knowing nothing of Terra except as legend, hearing only the names of the Emperor from the mouths of priests who grew hoarse with disbelief. When silence stretched into centuries, the world ceased to think of itself as part of an Imperium at all. They crowned new rulers, built new creeds, raised children who did not know the Aquila. By the time contact was restored, they were no longer imperial citizens. They were strangers, suspicious of Terra, hostile to its envoys. For them, the Imperium had abandoned them, and they had learned to live without it. Silence had not destroyed them, it had unmade them. This is the hidden wound that silence inflicts, not only death, not only famine, but transformation. A world cut off does not simply collapse. It changes. Sometimes it changes into ruin, devoured by hunger or war. Other times it changes into something unrecognizable, a culture reshaped without the Imperium's gaze. And when the silence lifts, those changes cannot be undone. Humanity may endure, but not as the Imperium. And in this way, every flicker of the Astronomican is more than a temporary darkness. It is the birth of a new fracture, the slow splintering of mankind into pieces too far flung to remember the whole. An empire built on 1,000,000 worlds cannot survive if even a handful drift away, and yet, drift they do. Silence does not come alone. Where the Astronomican falters, predators gather. For every world cast adrift by the failure of light, there are those waiting to consume it. Orcs sense weakness like sharks scenting blood, their war bands crashing through the void to plunder and burn. Tyranids descend like locusts, stripping the planet of biomass until nothing remains but dust. Chaos moves with subtler steps, whispering into the ears of the desperate, seeding cults that promise salvation in exchange for surrender. The Imperium's silence is not empty. It is filled with enemies who never tire, never hesitate, never forgive. On one shrine world, devoted entirely to the worship of the Emperor, silence lasted only a year. At first the faithful held firm, their prayers louder than the rumble of empty supply convoys, their hymns echoing in cathedrals that still blazed with light. But hunger gnawed even at the devout, when chaos cults emerged, promising bread and warmth in exchange for secret worship. The starving listened. The ecclesiarchy thundered that starvation was a holy test, but piety withers quickly when children die in the streets. Within months, the cathedrals became fortresses, priests barricaded behind marble doors while the masses chanted the names of other gods. When imperial reinforcements arrived at last, the planet was ablaze. Its cathedrals were desecrated, its relics shattered, its people transformed into zealots of the warp. Silence had made heretics of the Emperor's most faithful children. For soldiers, silence does worse than kill. It erodes identity. Regiments abandoned in hostile systems lose not only supplies, but purpose. Once their commanders fall and their lines crumble, They are no longer the Emperor's soldiers but wandering survivors. On some worlds, stranded regiments turned into bandits, preying upon the very people they were meant to defend. On others, they became mercenaries, offering their guns to local rulers in exchange for food. And in the darkest cases, they turned to worship of the same forces they once swore to oppose, convinced that if the Emperor's light could abandon them, then his enemies must hold greater power. Silence strips away more than communication. It strips away faith, until nothing is left but hunger and betrayal. Astropaths, trapped within that silence, suffer agonies beyond description. Deprived of the Emperor's guiding light, their minds drift helpless in the warp. To them, silence is not emptiness, but a cacophony of daemonic whispers pressing against their sanity. Some endure for days, clutching relics and murmuring hymns, until blood trickles from their eyes. Others, acclaimed almost instantly, their souls torn apart by predators who feast upon their weakness. When their choirs fail, the worlds they serve fall mute. No distress call escapes, no prayer reaches terror. Each astropathic death is a door closing forever. The most tragic stories are those of frontier colonies forgotten entirely. Families who left their homeworlds with hope, carrying the banners of the Aquila to settle new soil, only to find themselves abandoned when silence descended. Their children grew old, then their grandchildren, each generation clinging to rituals that made less and less sense with time. Without supply, technology failed. Lasguns became heirlooms, plasma weapons rusted into relics. Starships were cannibalized to build crude shelters, and when predators came, be they Xenos raiders or demonic incursion, there was no Imperial fleet to defend them. These colonies did not fall with fire and screams, they faded into legend, their bones buried in the dust of nameless worlds. For every hive city that riots, for every regiment that dies unreinforced, for every astropathic choir that screams itself into silence, the Imperium becomes weaker, its edges fraying into dust, and the tragedy is not only the deaths themselves, but the forgetting. When contact is finally restored, often centuries later, terror has already moved on. Administratum records mark the system as lost, its people are no longer counted among the Emperor's flock. To those who endured in silence, the return of Imperial authority is not salvation, it is invasion. The silence has made strangers of them, and strangers do not bow willingly. The galaxy is too vast for every cry to be heard. When the Astronomican flickers, billions scream in vain. Their silence is not absence, it is annihilation disguised as waiting. Silence is never empty. It grows heavier with each passing day, filling every gap in the heart of a world until no hope remains. At first it is disbelief, then it is fear. Finally, it becomes certainty. The Imperium is gone. The Emperor has abandoned his children, and nothing waits beyond the stars but teeth. This certainty changes people. It corrodes governors into tyrants, priests into fanatics, soldiers into deserters, and civilians into prey. Every world touched by silence suffers transformation, and not all emerge human. Some planets break swiftly. Others linger in a kind of twilight, existing on dwindling supplies and fading faith. On these, silence becomes generational. Children grow into adults, never hearing the name of Terra spoken with conviction. Grandparents speak of the Imperium as if it were legend, a distant kingdom that abandoned them long ago. Shrines crumble, banners rot, hymns become hollow. The Emperor's face, once carved into every wall and burned into every heart, becomes an echo, and in that void, new symbols rise. Local rulers forge their own cults. False prophets speak with the confidence of forgotten authority. Xenos masquerade as saviors. Daemons step into temples left empty of true worship. The Emperor's absence is never a vacuum. It is an invitation. And yet, silence can also breed stubbornness. There are worlds that cling to the creed with fanatic devotion, precisely because they believe they have been abandoned. For them, endurance is proof of loyalty. They execute the starving to conserve food. They burn heretics in the millions to purify doubt. Their faith becomes harder than steel, but also more brittle. When contact is restored, these worlds often resist Terra's authority, claiming they alone have been truly faithful. that the Imperium has become soft in its comfort. Silence twists not only into despair but into pride, and pride is as dangerous as heresy. The greatest cruelty of silence lies in its scale. Billions may die in riots, starve in hive warrens, or vanish in warp storms, yet the Administratum records these as numbers on parchment: a fleet delayed, a world lost, a regiment gone missing. These are statistics buried among millions of other lines. The individuals who suffered will never be remembered. Their pain is not history, only dust. The Imperium cannot grieve every loss. It does not have the capacity to hear every scream, and so silence is not only death, it is erasure. The enemies of mankind understand this better than the Imperium itself. The orcs thrive when silence isolates imperial forces, their warbands sweeping across undefended sectors. Tyrannid hive fleets gorge on worlds cut off from aid, leaving nothing but barren stone. The Necrons wait with patience older than stars, watching as silence fractures the Imperium into smaller and weaker pieces. And chaos revels most of all. For every moment the Astronomican dims, warp storms swell, daemons surge, and cults multiply. They do not need to strike every world. They only need to wait for silence to do their work. Across the galaxy, the Astronomican still burns, but those closest to it, who hear its falters, who feel its strain, know the truth. Each flicker births a new silence, somewhere in the stars. Each silence spawns famine, rebellion, or heresy. Each silence costs millions of lives, and the silences are growing more frequent. The Golden Throne remains, groaning beneath the weight of millennia, its machinery fed by endless sacrifice. But it is weary, and its weariness seeps into the light it projects. Already, the cracks spread outward, reaching into the farthest corners of the Imperium. The silence of lost worlds is not anomaly. It is omen. And if the throne fails entirely, there will be no silences scattered here and there, no isolated collapses for the Imperium to paper over. There will be one silence only, the silence of everything. The Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, stretching across 1,000,000 worlds, yet it has only one heart. Terra, cradle of mankind, throne of the Emperor, seat of the High Lords, and the place where all roads converge. To the Imperium's citizens, Terra is myth as much as reality, a distant beacon of order and faith, the place where the Emperor sits eternal. Few will ever glimpse its surface. Fewer still will tread the halls of the Imperial Palace, but all believe it to be impregnable, incorruptible, inviolate, and it is this belief that makes the truth so unbearable. For Terra is not impregnable. Its walls are thicker than mountains, its defenses forged from millennia of war, yet none of this protects against entropy. The Golden Throne is the only defense that matters, and it is failing. When the Astronomican falters, the galaxy stutters, but if the throne collapses, Terra itself will be drowned beneath the tide. Deep within the palace, where marble and ceramite rise higher than mountains, where incense fogs the air, and the air itself vibrates with chants, the Golden Throne labors on. The tech priests who maintain it grow frantic. Every year the rites grow longer, more desperate. Every month new sacrifices are demanded. Every day the sound of its machinery grows harsher, like an ancient engine tearing itself apart. They patch the cracks with flesh and prayer, but the cracks widen all the same. None admit it openly, but all know. One day, it will fail. And what happens then? The answer is not speculation to those who dwell within the palace. They feel it pressing against the walls already. The warp is not distant in Terra's skies. It is here, clawing just beyond the veil. It presses against the sanctum like water against glass, searching for the smallest fracture. When the throne falters, the barrier will weaken. When the throne fails, it will shatter. And Terra will not be overrun by armies or infiltrated by spies. Terra will drown in daemons. The Adeptus Custodes know this better than any. They stand silent watch, their golden armor gleaming, their spears sharp enough to pierce gods, yet even they cannot fight inevitability. They hear the machine groan and know their strength means nothing. If the throne fails, no spear will matter. The daemons will come not as armies but as a tide, endless and formless, pouring through the walls of reality. Terra will become a battlefield not of stone and steel, but of nightmares given flesh. Even the custodians, proud and unyielding, feel the weight of despair pressing against their oaths. For the priests of the ecclesiarchy, the thought is heresy. To them, the emperor is eternal, his throne unbreakable, yet even they see the signs. The emperor's light burns strangely, flaring and dimming like a sick star. His body trembles at times, spasming against the restraints of the throne. The sacrifices increase as though desperation itself is guiding the rituals, and whispers spread among the faithful. Perhaps these are signs of his awakening, that the emperor prepares to rise once more, but for every whisper of awakening, there is another of death. Perhaps these are not the throes of rebirth but of ending. Perhaps the god emperor is dying. Among the Mechanicus, darker rumors fester still. They know more of the throne's inner workings than any others, though even their knowledge is fragmented. Some claim the device was never meant to sustain the emperor, but to bind him, to keep his essence chained. If so, then what would his death mean? Freedom? Apotheosis? Or nothing at all? They cannot agree, and so they bury their doubts beneath ritual, knowing that if the throne fails, their debates will be meaningless. Beyond the palace walls, Terra thrums with life. Hive cities stretch into poisoned skies, manufactorums roar with endless labor, pilgrims crowd in endless lines for a glimpse of the outer gates. They do not know the truth. They cannot. They kneel in prayer, believing their God eternal, their world secure. But when the throne fails, their prayers will be drowned in screams. The warp will not discriminate between pilgrim and priest, soldier and citizen. It will consume all. And in that silence, in that storm, the heart of mankind will cease to beat. The day it begins, there is no trumpet, no proclamation from the high lords, no sign written across Terra's bruised sky. It begins with a tone, not silence, worse than silence. A wrongness in the golden throne's voice, a single gear slipping against its mate, a note that rakes along the nerves of everyone within the Sanctum Imperialis. Tech priests freeze mid-rite, augmetic hands hovering above control cogitators. A custodian's visor turns a fraction toward the throne, the movement so slight it would be invisible to mortal eyes. The Sisters of Silence, passing like pale revenants along the gallery, pause in unison as if the air itself has thickened around them. The wrong note persists for a heartbeat too long, then another, then another. When it relents, no one breathes with relief. They breathe with dread because they know what it was, a rehearsal for failure. Later the tremors come. They are small at first, an almost imperceptible tremble in a buttress, a quiver through the marble of a processional stair. The palace has withstood bombardments that cracked continents, but these tremors do not come from without. They rise from the core, from the throne itself, as if the machine is coughing, as if Terra, the most holy world in existence, has caught a sickness. Litanies multiply, censers swing until the air is a haze of myrrh and machine oil. In vox relays hidden behind statues taller than cathedrals, the Mechanicus murmurs in binharic falsetto, trying to convince their machine spirits that all is well. All is not well. In the catacombs below, the intake halls thicken with condemned psychers, more than any scribe can count without error. Chains rattle, prayers break into sobbing, and the guards who have performed this work for lifetimes avoid each other's eyes. The ration of sacrifice is increased by decree no one signs, because no one wants their name on the page that says the price has risen again. The furnaces beneath the sanctum roar, as if pleased by the bounty, and for a few hours the throne's voice steadies, the pitch returning to its familiar predatory purr. Then the note slips again, and stays slip. Far above the machine, astropathic choirs on Terra strain until blood runs from their ears. Their minds, always bound to the Emperor's will like ships lashed to a pier, lurch against sudden surges and drops in the Astronomican's tidal pull. Messages that should travel smoothly through the Imperium snag and tear, some arriving flayed of meaning, others carrying parasitic echoes that skitter through the receiving mind like claws. Choi masters order the weakest withdrawn, only to find their replacements already spent. Vox silence spreads through the palace like frost. The High Lords demand answers. The answers are a litany of euphemism, transitory interference, Localized surge, ritual stabilization underway. Truth hides behind incense. It always has. On the walls of the Imperial Palace, the Adeptus Custodes alter nothing in their posture, nothing in the angle of their spears, nothing in the cadence of their patrols. They are certainty given form, yet certainty bleeds when it is cut, and the cut is deepening. They begin to double the inner cordon. They add one more check to each ritual of readiness, one more oath to each change of watch. It is not fear. To call it fear would be to reduce them to men. It is recognition that the day they were forged to meet may be a day no blade can bite. The Sisters of Silence feel it first as taste, a souring in the mouth, a metallic taint riding the air like the promise of oncoming storm. Their null fields, usually a cold lake pulled tight across their skin, begin to ripple with unseen wind. They move in larger cadres, stationing themselves at choke points where the warp has tried to press through in ages past. Their presence a nail driven deep into the fabric of the world. Novices buckle, eyes rolling back as the pressure mounts. Veterans grit their teeth and stare into nothing, daring it to look back. Some claim to see flickers at the edge of perception, a smudge against a column that refuses to resolve as shadow, a smile where no face should be, a handprint blooming dark on stone that no flesh has touched. Such claims become confessions written in neat script, signed in blood, sealed in silence. Terra outside the palace, senses only rumor. Pilgrims queue for kilometers to kiss sanctified rockcrete. Street preachers promise the faithful that brighter days are coming, that distant wars will end now that the emperor's attention is turned fully upon his children. Administratum scribes arrive home late, ink staining their fingers, telling no one that today they wrote the same order twice because the cogitators spit out 2-drop schedules with the same seal. In the hive below, men and women glance at the sky and swear they saw it bruise and then clear. A blink no one else admits to seeing. Manufacturum whistles blow on time. The shift changes on time. The ration lines move on time. Everything continues, because nothing on Terra stops without consequence. And then the first breach tests the palace. It is not grand. There are no horns. A seam opens where none should exist. A hairline in reality along a seam of warding etched 10,000 years ago by hands that never trembled. Air draws in with a sucking hiss and returns colder, as if someone on the other side has inhaled and exhaled within the walls. A tech adept working the line slumps, augmetic eyes jamming open, the pupils within spinning like compass needles. A sister steps forward, her presence a blade of negation, and the seam seals with a convulsion that feels like nausea shared by 1,000 souls. The adept wakes choking. The ward sigil over the seam is found hair-thin fractured, as if time itself had been tapping it with a hammer. Repairs are performed. Hymns are sung until tongues grow numb. For an hour the machine purrs. Then the tremors return, larger than before. News of the breach does not reach the High Lords in those words. It arrives as momentary ward fluctuation resolved by silent order intervention. Even translated, the message fails to convey the truth that the palace itself is beginning to complain. Doors stick where they never stuck, marble sweats. Oil won't take a wick. The throne's chant turns ragged at the corners. And below it all, a deeper sound begins to vibrate through the bones of those who live too close. Not the throne, but the thing pressing from the other side, patient as tide and twice as certain. When the additional sacrifices are ordered, the intake halls overflow, shackles clink in waves, and the smell of fear competes with incense, until even the custodians taste it at the back of their throats. The furnaces blossom, throwing heat that ripples the air above the offering altars. Psychers go to their deaths with eyes already glazed by distant visions of the warp. Some smiling as if they have seen a sunrise only they can name, others fighting until teeth break. The throne drinks. The Astronomican flares. For a heartbeat, the galaxy steadies on its axis. For a heartbeat, Terra stands. The heartbeat passes. The tremors spread beyond the throne room. In the palace's outer halls, archivists find shelves tilting as if nudged by an unseen hand. Vox relays crackle with phantom words in languages no cogitator recognizes. Pilgrims sleeping outside the gates wake screaming, swearing they dreamed the same vision. Terror swallowed by a sunless sky, its towers sinking into a sea of shadow. At first, priests call it a miracle, proof that the Emperor speaks to his people. But the visions sour. Soon the dream becomes plague, shared hallucinations, night after night, until even the most fervent begin to whisper of ill omens. Inside the sanctum, the machinery groans louder, sparks spit like falling stars, and wards seared into the marble begin to smolder at their edges. Tech priests chant until their voices rasp raw, coating fractures with unguents of sacred oil and blood. They claim success, but none dare look directly into the throne's core, where the husk of the Emperor trembles faintly, his ruined frame quaking against the supports that bind him upright. A priest who allows his gaze to linger too long swears he sees the Emperor's lips move, not in blessing, but in a grimace of unbearable pain. The Adeptus Custodes watch, silent and still. For 10,000 years they have been the unbroken wall between the Emperor and his enemies. But now they face an enemy no spear can pierce, the slow collapse of the very thing they guard. Their stoicism is absolute, yet within their private councils they debate grim truths. Should the throne fail, do they guard the Emperor's husk against daemonic tide? Do they evacuate the High Lords and preserve the continuity of rule, or do they march into the warp storm, their deaths a final act of loyalty? No consensus is reached, only silence. Among the Sisters of Silence, the change is sharper still. Their null auras, usually steady shields against the warp, begin to waver unpredictably. Some novices collapse without warning, their minds overwhelmed by waves of pressure rolling out from the throne. Veterans whisper through hand signs of shadows that gather just out of sight, pressing harder every day, clawing against the walls of reality. When they assemble in the Hall of Echoes, their combined aura should be a fortress of absence. Instead, it feels like a battlefield, cracks appearing in their null fields as if the warp itself is learning to resist them. Outside, Terra continues to churn with life. Hive cities belch smog, manufactorums thunder, pilgrims weep in the dust, and still the administratum buries itself beneath mountains of parchment. Orders are stamped, convoys dispatched, penalties recorded. Few beyond the highest circles know what trembles within the mice walls. The illusion of eternity must remain, for if Terra falters, the Imperium falters. And so, reports are censored, whispers strangled, and fear smothered beneath ritual. But fear cannot be smothered forever. It seeps between cracks, trickling through rumor and prayer. Some pilgrims whisper that the Emperor is stirring. Others, darker still, whisper that he is dying. The High Lords convene more frequently, their chambers echoing with panic hidden behind formality. They speak of flux in the Astronomican and ritual misalignments, yet their eyes betray the truth. They know the center cannot hold. Some propose desperate measures, scouring forbidden vaults for technologies best left buried, petitioning the Mechanicus to awaken ancient war machines, even suggesting heretical experiments to harness Primarch bloodlines. Others insist silence, that to speak of failure is to summon it, but the silence is already here, growing, pressing, and all the while, the throne consumes. The daily toll of psychers rises, thousands upon thousands immolated in fire and shrieking agony. Their bodies crumble to ash, their souls torn to feed a flame that falters regardless. The halls of sacrifice echo with screams uncounted, yet still the machine stutters. Still it groans. Still it fails. When the Astronomican flickers now, entire sectors of space plunge into chaos. Fleets vanish mid-voyage, regiments die cut off from orders, worlds starve as convoys never arrive. The galaxy reels, and Terra itself trembles. The ruin of Terra has not yet come, but its shadow stretches long across the stars. For in the heart of the palace, behind walls older than memory, the golden throne shudders like a beast in its death throes. And every time it falters, the predators beyond reality press harder, their laughter echoing through the cracks. The dam is breaking. The end does not come with thunder. It comes with a sigh. Within the throne room, where incense clouds the air and chants resound like storm winds, the machinery suddenly grows quiet, not silent, quiet, as if the endless labor of pistons and gears has slackened, a titan slowing its steps. Tech priests falter mid-prayer, their voices stumbling, custodians grip their spears. The Sisters of Silence feel the shift instantly, their null auras shivering like glass struck by a hammer. The Astronomican flickers. For one heartbeat it gutters like a dying candle. Across the galaxy, navigators open their third eyes to darkness. On Terra, the ground shakes. At first it is like the tremors of old earthquakes, a shudder that rattles banners and sends dust drifting from vaulted ceilings. But then it grows. The palace walls groan. Statues crack, stained glass windows depicting the emperor's triumphs shatter into showers of crimson shards. From the catacombs below rise screams, not ritual screams, but the raw howls of psychers burning too quickly, their lives spent in moments instead of hours. Sacrifice accelerates as the machine gulps them down, desperate for fuel, consuming in panic. But the hunger is too great. Then, the first tear opens. It is not in the air, but in reality itself. A seam splits above the throne, jagged as lightning, spilling light too bright to be holy. From within come whispers that scrape against the mind like knives, voices overlapping in every tongue humanity has ever spoken, and many it has never known. Demonic claws stretch through, blacker than void, hungrier than famine. The Sisters of Silence rush forward, their null auras slamming against the wound, forcing it to shrink, but more cracks spiderweb outward, racing across the sanctum walls. Every barrier etched into stone for 10,000 years begins to fail at once. The Emperor convulses. His withered body spasms, bones rattling against the throne's bindings. Sparks cascade from the machinery, rivers of fire running down its golden face. His psychic light flares wildly, blasting outward like a nova. Astropaths across Terra shriek as blood bursts from their eyes, their minds overloaded by a signal no longer steady, but catastrophic. The Astronomican is not a beacon now, it is a scream that tears through the warp, shaking predators from their slumber, drawing demons like carrion draws flies. Outside, Terra itself begins to fracture. Pilgrims collapse in the streets, clutching their skulls as visions seize them. Visions of a sky torn open, of stars bleeding, of shadows walking in daylight. Hive spires sway, manufactorums collapse, oceans boil. In the heavens above, the void itself ripples as warp storms blossom. Red lightning tearing across the black. Ships in orbit vanish into fire, their hulls dissolving into demonic shapes before exploding into ruin. The custodians move, not to strike, but to shield. They form a golden wall before the throne, spears raised, as demonic shapes thrust through widening rifts. Some are vast as towers, others small and writhing, but all hunger for the husk upon the throne. The Custodes fight, and their valor is beyond comprehension. They strike down gods, burn daemons with blows of incandescent fury, their armor glowing with wards older than memory, yet even they are overwhelmed. For every daemon slain, 3 more pour through. The tide is endless. The Sisters of Silence burn themselves out in desperation. Entire cadres collapse, their null fields stretched to breaking, their bodies convulsing as they push their souls to the brink. Their sacrifice buys moments, nothing more. The rifts widen, the tide swells, the throne shrieks, louder than the daemons, louder than Terra itself, until the air is nothing but sound and light and death. And at the center of it all, the Emperor's body slumps. The convulsions stop. The head bows. For a heartbeat, the Astronomican extinguishes. The galaxy goes dark. Fleets drift blind. Worlds scream into silence. Predators howl with joy. Then, something stirs. The husk on the throne straightens, though the machinery binding him cracks and splinters under the strain. Sockets where eyes once burned flare with terrible fire, not steady but jagged, violent, alive. The rifts recoil as if struck, daemons shrieking in terror. The Astronomican flares back into being, brighter than ever before, so bright navigators across the stars fall to their knees, blinded by its fury. The scream becomes a roar, and for one impossible moment, it seems the Emperor rises. But whether this is resurrection or final death, no one can say. The throne collapses beneath him. The sanctum is consumed in light. Terra shakes as if the planet itself is breaking. Across the galaxy, billions witness visions of fire and shadow, of salvation and damnation, all at once. And then, silence. Across the galaxy, silence falls like ash. It is not the hush of peace but the void left when a great engine cuts out, when the last note dies and all that remains is the memory of sound. For a heartbeat that stretches beyond time, every navigator's third eye sees nothing. Every astropath's choir is an unstruck chord. Every captain on every bridge holds breath with the reflex of drowning men. The Astronomican, which for 10,000 years has burned like a sovereign star in a sea of nightmares, is gone. What remains is absence, and absence has gravity. Ships that were mid-translation feel the floor tilt beneath reality. Hulls groan. Geller fields flicker as if eyelids were forced open and forced shut again. There is no compass now, only storm. In one battle fleet, a navigator of ancient pedigree claws the veil from her eye and meets a darkness so complete it has texture. She laughs once, a sound too bright, and then her mind blooms into red flowers. Nobody can see. On a pilgrim barge far rimward, a child who has never known a sky beyond Plasteel looks up as the hymns falter, and asks his mother if the Emperor has gone to sleep. She cannot answer. The question is larger than language. On worlds where silence already taught hard lessons, the final extinguishing of the beacon lands like a verdict. Hive cities whose spires were kept upright by habit rather than hope begin to list. The ration lines that have moved with ritual exactitude for centuries kink and snarl, then break. Voxcasters spit nothing but breath and static. Governors convene emergency councils and speak with the confidence of men who learned long ago how to face cameras without blinking. When the lenses turn off, their hands tremble. In the underhives, cult symbols painted small for safety swell across entire hab walls in a single night, as if boldness were a tide. Preachers of the ecclesiarchy do not soften their sermons, they sharpen them until the words draw blood. Faith does not retreat in the dark. It either calcifies into stone or liquefies into something that runs faster than water. Both are dangerous. The Astra Militarum learns again an old truth. Orders require a sender to be orders at all. Regiments in the field stand at parade rest before dead Vox, trying to hear meaning in the hiss. Artillery batteries elevate barrels to the coordinates of yesterday's war because that is what the book says to do when no new book arrives. Some commanders march on as if the Emperor still whispers in their ears through the crackle, and perhaps he does. Others bury their banners quietly and tell their soldiers they have been reassigned to the defense of their birth worlds, though those worlds are centuries behind them. There are victories, strange and local, born of courage and luck in equal measure. There are tragedies with no witnesses, where heroism spills into sand and is drunk by it without trace. Astropaths suffer the longest second in history. When the light died, many burned outright, minds flashing to ash, but those who survived the first breath are left in a dark that moves. Predators curl through that dark with patient appetite, testing the edges of every choir's courage. The strongest link themselves arm to arm, prayer to prayer, building a human chain across the abyss where once a sun stood. They send nothing because there is nowhere to send it, but they remain, and in remaining they accomplish the smallest victory imaginable. They do not break. For now, there are rumors, there are always rumors, about Terra, that the palace is a crater of glass and gold, that the Adeptus Custodes stand as statues turned toward a light only they can see, that the Sisters of Silence sing without voices, and in their song the warp recoils, that the Emperor rose and strode 3 steps, and in those 3 steps, worlds were remade, that he died finally, absolutely, and in dying clenched a fist around the Astronomican, so tightly that the echo of it will never quite fade. Priests declare one version as liturgy by morning and a different version by twilight. The faithful accept both without noticing the contradiction. The truth may be simpler or worse. Perhaps no one knows. Perhaps the sanctum where knowing might happen is itself unmade. Xenos do not pause to weigh metaphysics. Orc empires flare like green suns as war bosses sense a kingdom of enemies without walls. Tyrannid tendrils alter course as if scenting fresh blood on a wind that does not exist. In tomb complexes where Necron courts have watched humanity with amused contempt, decision angles shift by fractions, and entire sectors are marked for harvest. Even among the Eldar, whose paths twist through 1,000 years like threads in a loom no human can read, there is a tremor of dread. Some craft worlds shutter their eyes and turn away, others empty their aspect shrines and make ready to die where they stand, as if that were the last noble shape left to take. And yet, amid the ruin, stubbornness flowers. On a forge moon whose furnaces cool for the first time since its naming, Amagos orders every lumen extinguished and has his Skitarii patrol by touch and auspex. In the perfect dark they find rhythms no cogitator ever logged, machine spirits that hum like old hymns, and coax a single line of power through with hands that remember more than the brain. On an ocean world, a flotilla of fishing skiffs learns to read the sky without sat beacons, and when raiders crest the horizon, the skiffs vanish into fog with a grace born of desperation and practice. The raiders burn empty water until their ammunition winds hollow. On a death world whose flora drinks promethium for sport, an Astra Militarum lieutenant tells his squad they will hold the bridge because the book said so yesterday, and nothing better has been written today. They hold it until night, and when night comes they hold. The end of a light is not the end of motion. It is the beginning of motion without map. In that unmapped space, humanity reveals what it has always been in the long shadow of gods and monsters. A species of small fires carried in cupped hands, each windbreak another back turned to the storm. Whether the storm is the last, no one can say. The question has too many faces, and all of them look like tomorrow. The silence spreads outward like cracks in glass. Sectors that once pulsed with steady convoys now blink into darkness, their beacons dead, their fleets stranded. At first, administratum clerks insist this is only disruption, an interval of interference soon to be corrected. They issue ration decrees, adjust schedules, stamp parchment. But parchments pile, vox relays hiss with nothing but static, and governors who once ruled with the certainty of Terra's light begin to sense the truth. This silence is not a pause, it is permanence. In some places order dissolves swiftly. A hive city on Malachor Prime, home to 30 billion burns in a single week. Grain freighters that should have arrived are lost to the warp, and the lower hive riots spiral into full revolt. The Arbites fire until their shotguns glow, but ammunition dwindles and walls collapse. Soon mobs drag Arbites through the streets, chanting the names of gods they never spoke before. By the time the ecclesiarchy calls down exterminatus to preserve the wider sector, it is too late. The cults have already seeded off-world, carried by smugglers who whisper that the Emperor's light has gone forever. Other places resist. On Veritas Secundus, the governor gathers every regiment into the capital spire and declares a generation of rationing and austerity. Workers toil by candlelight, factories powered by wind and muscle. Faith is hammered into law, every heresy punished by fire. It holds barely, the world survives, its population halved, its creed transformed into something jagged and unrecognizable. When an orc warband finally finds the planet, they discover not a broken people but zealots who hurl themselves into battle screaming prayers louder than gunfire. Veritas burns, but it burns brightly, consumed in a pyre of fanaticism born from silence. Astropaths across the Imperium fall into despair. Cut off from Terra's voice, they try to anchor themselves to one another, creating fragile chains of psychic contact across neighboring systems. But daemons hunt those chains, sniffing them out like predators in the water. Entire choirs vanish mid-transmission, their souls ripped into the immaterium. Survivors speak of voices that wore the Emperor's cadence, but ended in laughter. Many astropaths choose to end their lives before they are claimed. The black vaults of Terra fill with their names, ink on parchment for a choir of ghosts no longer singing. Navigators fare no better. The death of the Astronomican blinds them utterly, leaving void ships helpless in seas without stars. Many take their own lives rather than endure the madness pressing against their third eyes. A few attempt to guide their ships by instinct, drifting through the warp without compass. Some vanish forever, swallowed by tides. A rare handful emerge centuries later, their crews degenerated into tribes of feral survivors worshipping the navigator as a god. These ships are less rescues than plagues, spreading confusion and horror wherever they wash ashore in real space. Meanwhile, enemies move with purpose. Orc Guraigs roar across unlit sectors, fleets following the scent of battle like sharks trailing blood. Tyrannid tendrils slither through the void unchecked, their hive minds unbothered by the death of human beacons. Even Necron dynasties stir, their cold logic calculating that mankind is vulnerable, fragmented, ready for harvest, yet it is chaos that reaps most. Warp storms bloom across the galaxy, unbound by the Emperor's flame. Demonic incursions multiply, entire systems lost in hours. Planets scream into the void, but no help comes, no light answers, only shadows. And still, humans endure. On a frozen mining moon, a single regiment of Astra Militarum holds a valley against a tide of heretics, their rations gone, their ammunition dwindling. They hold not because they believe relief will come. It will not, but because the book told them to hold until relieved, and the book is the last anchor they have, on a forge world where the furnaces have cooled. Magi command their adepts to recite ancient prayers not to machines, but to memory itself. In doing so they keep alive the rhythm of labor, even when there is no power, no ore, no future. In an orphanage on a shrine world, a single priest lights candles every dusk, telling children that the Emperor still watches, even if his light is gone. The children believe, and that belief is enough to carry them another day. The Imperium does not die in a moment. It dies in fragments, in riots, in whispers, in desperate prayers. But it also endures in fragments, in last stands, in stubborn rituals, in faith that defies reality. The light is gone, yet humanity clings to sparks, small and fragile, but sparks nonetheless. The question is not whether those sparks are enough to survive the dark. The question is whether they will ignite into a fire, or sputter into ash. In the dark after the light, borders do not so much shift as dissolve. The Imperium's map, once a fiction maintained by parchment and prayer, unthreads into a scatter of embers. Each ember becomes a principality, a republic in name only, a theocracy of one shrine, or a fortress ruled by a single regiment that refuses to stand down. These are not successor states in the formal sense. They are reflexes. They are what a species does when it forgets how to breathe in unison and must relearn the motion one rib at a time. On some worlds, the administratum's skeleton hardens into a crown. The scribe who stamped ration orders the day the beacon died becomes chancellor the next, and by month's end, Lord Protector by popular exhaustion. He preserves forms, seals, registers, tributes, while shredding the meanings beneath them. Taxes are collected in ammunition and wheat. Citizenship is redefined as whoever can lift a lascan and recite the creed without choking. The Aquila remains above the palace gate, but the bird no longer faces Terra. It faces inward, toward the granaries. An empire turned homeward is an animal licking its wounds, necessary and never pretty. Other planets fracture by philosophy. In one system, 3 moons declare themselves guardians of the true creed, each citing archaic scriptures discovered conveniently after the last astropath died. Their fleets, cobbled from patrol craft and retrofit cargo haulers, duel in slow-motion battles that kill more dockworkers than pilots. Each victory is an affirmation not of truth but of proximity to food. On a nearby agri-world, communes sprout around water towers, their leaders preaching a gentle secularism that lasts precisely until the first orc raiding party crashes down in sacrificial drop cans, painted with laughter. The communes do not endure the lesson. The Adeptus Mechanicus adapts by descending. Forge worlds whose orbital docks once glowed like constellations turn their gaze to ground-level salvage. Cathedra of steel become scrapyards, ornate as basilicas. Rituals of ignition are rewritten as litanies of reclamation. Praise be the rivet, blessed be the thread, sanctified the bolt we find beneath the ash. Magi, who once spoke in equations, now barter in teeth and ore, sending Skitarii patrols across ruined highways to retrieve a single intact cogitator core from a manufactorum swallowed by vines. It is not dignity perhaps, but it is continuity. Among machine cults, continuity is indistinguishable from faith. The Astra Militarum's remnants, those not devoured, not deserted, not enthralled, retreat to doctrine as to a fortress. On garrison moons, they turn parade grounds into terraced fields and drill fields into cisterns. The old schedules survive. Reveille still sounds. Uniforms are mended along the same seams they were always mended. requisition forms are filled out and filed with careful ink that no quartermaster will ever read. In the evening, sergeants read aloud from dog-eared manuals by lumen candle, and recruits listen as if the words might still summon artillery by the force of memory alone. In truth, the manuals summon something else: posture, bearing, the habits of a civilization that refuses to admit it is falling. Across choked shipping lanes that will never open again, rumors travel with the reliability of plague. A Primarch seen walking along the edge of a dust storm, a craft world trading grain for relics beneath a sky that shimmered like glass, a Orc war boss calling himself Emperor Grin and building a palace from the bones of void ships, a Necron court that sent emissaries to parley and asked only for silence, which they then enforced with absolute precision. These tales are lies, or they are true, or they are both at once. It does not matter. They function as currency, as weather, as prophecy. In the night without lighthouse, stories become maps. Chaos blooms where boredom and terror coexist. Not always with horns and fire, often with committees and songs. Cults of mercy infiltrate clinics, dosing patients with drafts that taste like relief and open like doors. Cores form around a single beautiful voice that never seems to draw breath. And in the singing, the congregation forgets to eat. Administrators sign compacts that legalize small blasphemies. A calendar altered here, a shrine repurposed there, until the new calendar has no saints and the shrine is a mouth. When daemons finally walk, the people are grateful. Anything to end the wait. And yet the other side of bloom is root. There are worlds that set their teeth and become narrow as blades. A mountain fastness on a pilgrim route shuts its gates and learns the old ways of quarrying without promethium, carving out granaries in cold rock. A river planet floods its own delta to drown an invasion and then plants rice on the silt, reciting prayers over every seed. A drifting station with a population of 5,000 decides that every deck will sing the same hymn at dusk. They do, and in the harmony they find a discipline the warp cannot easily pry apart. These are not victories the Minotaurum would have counted, they are victories nonetheless. In this long night, the Eldar appear like ghosts at the edges of campfire light. Sometimes they trade and vanish, leaving behind blades that hum with forgotten names. Sometimes they strike without warning and depart without explanation, as if balancing an equation no human was taught to see. Once, on a void hulk drifting between two dead suns, an Imperial chaplain and an Eldar warlock meet in a hall of frozen breath and exchange a single nod. Each believes the other damned. Each is correct enough for the moment. They pass and do not kill, and 2,000 souls live another day because of it. The galaxy in the dark learns new maths of mercy. Perhaps the strangest adaptation comes from those who once lived closest to the light, worlds within a few weeks' warp of terror when such weeks meant anything. They endure a grief that has shape. No rumor will convince them the palace sings. No counterfeit liturgy will mend the tear. They do not replace the emperor with idols. They do not praise the dark. They erect empty thrones in their capital squares and keep them swept. They pass laws against lying about the sky. Children grow up under honesty's weight, and some bend, and some break, and some straighten into something hard and luminous that does not need prophecy to stand. It is not a golden age. It is not even bronze. It is hammered iron, stained and serviceable, ugly where it must be, beautiful where someone had the luxury to care. The night goes on, the embers hold. Night without dawn becomes the galaxy's new rhythm. It is not merely the loss of light, but the loss of certainty. The Astronomican had been more than a beacon. It had been proof that somewhere on Terra the Emperor endured. Without it, there is only conjecture, and conjecture breeds both terror and audacity. Whole subsectors simply vanish from memory, not because they are destroyed, but because nothing links them anymore. An agri-world feeding 3 hive ships is cut off. Its convoys gone. At first the governor rationed calmly, expecting the flicker to resolve. By the 3rd year, famine swept the cities. By the 4th, the forests burned in ritual offerings to unnamable gods. On the 5th, when the silence broke with a fleet arriving at last, they did not greet the Imperial Aquila, they opened fire. Silence had rewritten their allegiance. Other regions metamorphose into warlord kingdoms. A fleet commander cut adrift with 3 battlecruisers and no orders crowns himself protector of the Meridian cluster. At first he preserves the old laws, demanding tithes and reciting the creed in his councils, but decades pass, then centuries, and when his grandchildren rule, the Aquila has been stylized into a hawk with claws dripping blood, and the creed reduced to a hymn sung before battle. They do not think of themselves as traitors, they think of themselves as survivors. Faith, paradoxically, blooms and withers in tandem. On shrine worlds, priests declare that the Emperor has withdrawn his light to test mankind's resolve. Mass pilgrimages march across wastelands, barefoot, bleeding but still chanting his name. Some of these pilgrims vanish into warp storms that devour them like fire-swallowing paper. Others found entire new orders, monasteries that hammer nails of discipline into the silence, proclaiming their faith is stronger now that it is unlit. Yet in equal measure, cults spread like contagion. The ruinous powers no longer whisper, they shout, and desperate ears hear only promises. The galaxy tilts further each year toward the warp's hunger. The Xenos empires seize the opportunity with cruel efficiency. Orcs erupt in endless wires, fueled by laughter at the weakness of humankind. Hive fleets drift toward new prey, feasting on planets with no relief fleets to save them. The Necrons stir in patient waves, reclaiming tomb worlds once hidden beneath Imperial banners. Even the Eldar, fractured though they are, appear in greater frequency, some warning, others raiding, all bearing witness to the unraveling of mankind's dominion. The galaxy does not pause to mourn humanity's silence. It moves to inherit it, and still humanity refuses to vanish. In the endless night, sparks remain. A regiment on a fortress moon invents a new calendar, marking each day by the sound of their drill sergeant's whistle. Centuries later, their descendants still rise at dawn to whistles blown by men who do not know what dawn is. On a station adrift in dead space, a single choir of astropaths continues to sing, even though they know no one hears them. Their hymn becomes a heartbeat for the survivors around them, a reminder that the Emperor's voice once spoke and might again. On a dying world stripped by tyrannids, one hive city seals itself underground, living for generations on fungus farms and blind faith, emerging one day into sunlight that feels alien, and declaring themselves still his, still imperial, still human. The Imperium is gone. But mankind, fractured into shards, carries on. Each shard is a story, some tragic, some defiant, some monstrous, and the question that looms over them all is the same. Will the Emperor return? Did he die when the throne failed? Did he ascend, or does he linger still, silent, waiting? No answer comes. The galaxy waits in night, its stars burning cold, its people clutching sparks of faith and memory. The end has come, yet it is not the end. It is only the beginning of the longest silence in history. And in that silence, humanity learns what it means to live without light. The galaxy no longer remembers the shape of dawn, where once the Astronomican burned. There is only absence, an unlit horizon stretching forever. The Imperium as it was is gone, its borders fractured, its maps meaningless, its laws scattered like dust across uncountable stars. Yet in the silence, humanity endures. On forgotten worlds, children still learn to speak the Emperor's name, though they do not know what it means. On drifting hulks, soldiers still march in formation, though they no longer know who they serve. On shrine moons and forge stations, priests and magi still chant their litanies, though the light they were written for has died. Ritual survives where reason collapses, faith persists where certainty has burned away, and so the galaxy is filled not with emptiness but with sparks. Each tiny, each fragile, each insisting that night is not final. But silence is not passive. It listens, it learns, it spreads. Warp storms swell and shrink like tides, devouring empires and returning them as ruins. Daemons prowl between stars, whispering into the ears of desperate survivors. Orcs roar, tyrannids devour, Necrons harvest, Eldar mourn and strike. Against such predators, mankind's fragments are small and thin. And yet mankind has always been small, thin, fragile. That fragility has never stopped it before. Of the Emperor, nothing is certain. Some say he died in his chair, and his death screamed across the warp like a funeral dirge. Others claim he rose, striding into the Imperium to battle the gods themselves, leaving his throne empty but his presence burning in new and hidden ways. Some whisper that he was never divine at all, only the greatest of men, and that his ending proves it. But even those who deny his divinity cannot deny his echo, for even in silence, humanity still speaks his name. Perhaps that is enough, perhaps it is not. The Imperium is gone, the light is gone, but the story of mankind is not finished. It stretches into the silence, a thread frayed but unbroken, weaving new patterns in a night without end. Whether those patterns are triumph or tragedy, no one can yet say. The only certainty is that the galaxy waits alone, divided, trembling beneath a sky without beacon. And in that waiting, in that long silence, the fate of everything is decided.